So again, like just jumping in right into it, a lot of people ask me like, man, why this topic? Or what interests you about this topic? And I think for me, hugely my experience as a student athlete in college, a lot of these things that these questions that I asked and these things that I thought about were things that I thought about when I was playing ball and when I was in school. Um, I do consider myself like a real curious person, so I've always been curious about how black men or black males think about what success means, especially going into sports and being involved in sports. A lot of times, we want to go pro. That's usually the goal to some degree. And, when you think about those percentages of college athletes or athletes in general that go pro, very, very slim numbers. So, it's always fascinating to me to think about, how athletes think about what it means to be successful outside of that. But specifically, black male student athletes, along the way, I learned that some challenges that exist that don't quite exist for their peers and their counterparts. So that's just a little bit about the inspiration for choosing this topic. So I thought that would be cool to just kind of take a stroll down memory lane right quick. I really love that picture. That's one of my favorite pictures from when I played ball. So then thinking about the rationale. So the rationale for this study, I thought about, just like peeling through the literature and talking about the outcomes, like outcomes for black male student athletes as they finish up their time as competitors, and whether that ends in a graduation or a no graduation, like what happens after. So research shows that on average, the outcomes for black male student athletes oftentimes don't end up the same way as their peers. So whether that be having graduated with a degree that isn't really very expansive or not able to do much with, or never having graduated at all, even after playing several years and contributing to the university and contributing to the team. So this study is important for that reason. Also for the inequities and exploitation that we see. That is a reality within the college system, college sports system. So in thinking about the majority of participants who make up the teams that make the most money for these colleges and universities are oftentimes black males. But in looking at the graduation rates and also looking at these outcomes that I just mentioned, oftentimes they end up on the short side of the stick. So I think it's really important to kind of close the gap on that with this kind of research, to be able to help you guys have better positive outcomes and just better, really just better contribute to their overall holistic development. And then I think another thing too that's important is when we talk about cultural expansion and visibility. A lot of times when we do turn on the TV and we do see sports, we looking at games, we see black men participate in these sports, right? There's a kind of like a running joke going along. Me and one of my frat brothers always talk about was like when was it's a joke, but there's kind of like some reality to it. But it's like when was the last time that a white cornerback started in the NFL, right? Um, Things like that. I think we definitely find humor around it, but when we peel it back, it's like what does that really mean, and how does that come to become a thing? So um, these are just a few things to think about as far as the rationale for this study. And again, why black male student athletes for the reasons listed above. Um, so all right, so when we think about the question being asked here, black male student athletes, again, predominantly at white institutions, experience several unique challenges that impact their post athlete lives, and I mentioned some of those already. So some of those challenges are the following listed: racial discrimination and social isolation, academic neglect, economic deprivation, limited leadership opportunities, and so many others. But just to speak to a few of these, when you talk about how the experience of a black male student athlete on the campus of a historically white institution, right? Like what are the interactions with the professors like? How are they viewed by their student peers? Um, what is that academic experience like coming from the high school situation where maybe academics wasn't they weren't prepared as great for the rigor of college collegiate study. Those are just a few of the challenges, and I'll go into a few more of those as we continue to go along. But again, mentioning that idea, citing Harper 2016, the sports that are most popular when you turn on the TV in March, or when you turn on the TV from September to December or January, the visibility of Black men on these fields is abundant. But yet there's another story being told behind the scenes after they're finished their time contributing to the colleges and universities that it's not talked about as much, right? So that's everything related to the problem here. And then when thinking about the purpose of the study, I really, what I really want to get out of this was really to understand, what kind of ways do Black male student athletes define success, right? Like what and how are they driven to achieve these successes, right? So one of my hypotheses was that there would be some component of playing professionally that would be a part of what it meant to be successful. But I also imagine that there would be other things that are not commonly talked about, or maybe not even imagined. So I do have some really cool information and really cool things that we was able to figure out. And then of course to be able to apply this knowledge and information in a way that helps stakeholders across the country and even across the world to better support Black male student athletes in their time during participating in sport, but then also after as well. So my theoretical framework for the study was critical race theory. For those of you who have not heard of critical race theory, it is one of the um, seen in the research more and more. It's one of the more kind of like in your face ways of thinking about race and its effects here in America. So the 5 tenets of CRT are listed here: counter storytelling, the permanence of racism, whiteness as property, interest convergence, and the critique of liberalism. So when we think about these ideas, basically the main thing to know here is the first and very most important tenet is the centrality and intersectionality of racism in the United States. It's this idea that racism has always existed, it continues to exist today, and will continue to exist in varying ways in the future. And because of that, people of color are influenced or affected by that. So that's really the most important thing to know here. At the intersection of sport, because Black male student athletes have in their identity being a BIPOC person or being a person of color, there is an intersection of challenges that come along with the other challenges of being a student athlete in college as well. So I chose this theoretical framework because um, I really felt like on a deeper level, it really meant more to me to really take this approach. When you think about the inequities that exist, right? Like you go to college for 4 years and you generate a lot of popularity, you generate a lot of money for an institution, but then when you leave that institution, you may or may not reap the benefits of what you contributed during that time. And I mean, to me, that spells inequity to me. So that was why it was important for me to use CRT as theoretical framework. So then here are my research questions. How do Black male student athletes define success, first and foremost? I don't have to read all of these. You guys can kind of see those. I'll leave this up for maybe just a couple more seconds. All right, so when we think about the literature, we'll go into the literature here and talk about a few ideas that I was able to peel through and things that I was able to find. But all of these concepts and ideas here listed are related to challenges and things to consider when talking about Black male student athletes and their experience in college athletics. Um, see right here. So moving slide going. So when we think about the literature, several again, like several topics to describe here. I can talk about a few of these. So one of them being the importance of mentors and their impact on Black male student athletes. Uh, I think what we see is we do see a lot of times athletic departments will usually try to utilize maybe previous players or people in the athletic department that can serve as mentors. Oftentimes, coaches can really be mentors in their role, being so tied in with athletes. But research shows that when mentors are present from different areas, Black male student athletes do on average have better experiences. And that's actually one thing that I'll talk about in my findings. One particular mentor, one particular figure, he had a really huge impact on the collaborators in this study. So that's one thing to kind of look at there. Also, you have the unique difficulties associated with being a student athlete, right? Like this, I remember not maybe like in the past 10, 15 years, like at one point the NCAA where they were really running a lot of commercials that focused on like, not only being the athlete, but being the student, like what you do off the court or off the field. But the reality is there's a lot of responsibilities, right? College is not particularly easy for everyone. And just managing your life as a student athlete can be very difficult. So when you think about the intersection again of race and other factors considered for Black male student athletes, that's kind of like adds to the complexity or another layer, really, we could just say, of their experience. So um, another foundational piece would definitely be poor graduation rates. I believe it's Harper 2016, 2018. I have a slide here with several really important reads for people who are interested in furthering looking at things related to this topic. But basically, in the Power Five schools, if you look over a period of time, you can see that football and basketball student athletes who identify as Black, when they look at those graduation rates, they continue to be year over year lower for Black male student athletes versus their peers and their counterparts. Now, there have been increases overall in graduation percentages, but the percentages for Black male student athletes still show to be lesser than their peers. So these are different things to consider in the literature and things that you might find if you're interested in continuing to kind of explore these ideas. All right. So when we think about, again, like the foundation of research on Black male student athletes really lies in academic and athletic success, right? So like what constitutes being successful as an athlete and what also constitutes being successful as an academic. So a lot of times what you'll see is this idea that Black male student athletes are not really that much concerned with doing well in school, just really wanting to stay eligible. Like that's labeled as a successful student athlete. But there's more to it than that. I do think that the NCAA does a relatively well job of establishing criteria for students as they matriculate throughout. But there are different readiness levels as Black male student athletes come into college and the support that they may or may not need as they matriculate. So that's definitely something to consider. Literature, let's see, got this next slide right here. Yeah, so here goes this slide here, and I'll leave this up for maybe like a minute. These are some of the most important, that are were some of the most important articles for me to explore, and really gave a lot of ideas and knowledge around what the experience of Black male student athletes has been like through the eyes and through the research of other professionals and researchers across different fields. So again, I definitely encourage you all to give some of these a look if you can. Maybe take a screenshot or just kind of maybe jot down some of the authors and title names. Um, I think these would be really important to consider. But so the 2018 edition, Sean Harper's Black Male Student Athletes and Racial Inequities. Again, I think that one is really, really nice because it really spells out across the most popular schools, right? So you look at, I don't know, like Alabama, Oklahoma, Ohio State, all of these schools are compiled, and the research shows, again, like what those graduation rates look like over time, how they've increased, how they've decreased, and also compared to other sports as well. So um, really, really interesting stuff to continue to engage with. All right, so then in terms of what I did, um, so my study was a qualitative study. So, really trying to get to the root of like more so through experiences versus crunching numbers and kind of using data analysis in that way. So qualitative inquiry is naturalistic inquiry, seeking to better understand, deeper understand a particular phenomena. So within the qualitative inquiry, I used the phenomenological approach. And this is directed towards particular concept thoughts and ideas directly coming from the source. So directly coming from my collaborators through interviews that I did. The location of most of my research would take place, while I was at school or even just at home. My interviews ended up being done virtually as COVID hit. COVID hit kind of around the same time as I was getting started with everything. So I was able to conduct all of my interviews via Zoom. The way that I solicited my collaborators was uh, built the relationship with a student organization on campus, on the campus of where the collaborators attended school. And through continuing to engage with that group, I was able to solicit via snowballing, kind of like a convenient way of sampling Black male student athletes who were a part of that's registered student organization. So the collaborators in this study identified as Black male student athletes during their undergraduate tenure, full-time, either full-time, currently attending at the time of interview, or having graduated within the past 5 years of at the time of interview, and also having been in good standing throughout the duration of their time as a student athlete. So ended up doing 6 individual interviews and 1 focus group. And my data analysis consisted of transcribing all of my interviews, really taking some time to do some critical self-reflection, using resource support groups, and I coded for themes throughout the transcriptions across each individual interview and focus group, and then trying my best to utilize professional settings to get feedback and create insight, as well as utilizing colleagues who are interested in providing feedback or kind of helping in that critical self-reflection period. So then the results of what I found here. So then research question number 1 was basically, kind of like the head title of the study: how do Black male student athletes define success? Let me get this pulled up here. All right, so yes, again, how do Black male student athletes define success? So here you will find a few quotes from the transcripts, um, and it was some pretty interesting things, right? So you had 2 different kind of areas that we really went into here. Um, Collaborators answered questions along the basis of things that they felt like were the biggest accomplishments till to date at the time of interview. What kind of things motivated them to succeed, um, and then also like what was their actual formal definitions. So here we can see, biggest accomplishments. The theme here was biggest accomplishments were really related to either academics or athletics. There were a few answers that were relational in nature, and then also kind of like professional and vocational. But thematically, athletics and academics kind of ruled in this for this particular question. So graduating college, getting graduate degrees, those are the kinds of things that came up. Also, when we talk about accomplishments athletically, playing in the NFL, I did have 2 collaborators that ended up playing professionally, professional football, um, and then also winning championships in high school, and then also making the team. I also had 2 walk-ons, two of the collaborators identified as walk-on student athletes who weren't originally on scholarship at the institution that they competed at. So then moving forward, theme number 2 for research question number 1 was personal definitions of success involve some kind of like individual nature to the way goals were set. So things not being identified for you by someone else, but really success being self-defined. And then also another thing that really came up was having a positive impact on the community. So your success is being greater than yourself, really having impacted other people besides yourself. So Malcolm speaks here, success is predicated on happiness, right? And the effect that you're having around other people. So are you doing what you love to do, and are you having a positive impact on your community or your family? I think when I think about critical race theory and this idea of counter narratives, right? Like I think this is really important, and that's one tenet that continues to show up throughout all of the research questions and all of the themes. Is like this information is so rich, um, just because it's not often times that we get this kind of information from this population of people. Historically, certain voices have been silenced. Certain voices have not been always solicited to see what that experience is really like. So, I do think this is kind of like a counter narrative in terms of how Black male student athletes look at what it means to be successful, like this idea of something being greater than yourself and impacting other people. So then, theme number 3 for research question number 1 was that being successful meant building and maintaining relationships, so recognizing the importance of relationships, setting an example for others, being able to apply what you learn, so not just taking in information and not being able to utilize in the real world, staying eligible for competition, which is one that definitely something that came up in the literature oftentimes, so that is consistent with the literature, and then making good grades. So that's again like when I think of counter narratives, there can be this idea throughout the literature and maybe even stereotypes about Black male student athletes not really caring too much about doing well in school. But interestingly, this whole group, all of them graduated and all of them had goals of making a GPA over 3.0. Aaron talks about right here, it's like you start from the bottom again, you realize, hey, I need to get all A's. And he graduated with a 3.7, and he really saw how important that would be for what he would be doing after college to go into the field of business. So this is theme number 3 for question number 1. So then moving on to research question number 2, which was what are Black male student athletes' motivations to succeed academically and also athletically? So the theme, what showed up the most here was motivation to succeed academically was driven by the career aspirations, familial influences, having to pay for tuition. So the act of like, I'm paying for tuition, so I should be doing well in school. Like I'm not going to be paying this money and I'm not doing well in school. So that was something that came up. And then also staying eligible for competition once again comes up. So academic goals included graduating from college and earning a 3.0 or higher, as previously mentioned. So, Dre down here talks about subconsciously just the goal to make my mama proud, and understanding that education was important was a motivating factor for him. So it's research question number 2, theme. And then theme 2, more on the athletic side here. Get my windows together. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when it came to motivation to succeed in sport, familiar influences showed up once again, but then also, making it to the professional ranks. So making it to the league, make it to the league. So Aaron talked about, initially that was what it is, kind of like league or bust. If I ain't make it to the league, I was unsuccessful, right? And I'm just, as I listened to him and reflected on the data, as I listened to that, I just think about like how many Black male student athletes maybe follow that kind of train of thought of like, dang, I ain't make the league, so ain't nothing else to do. But I do have a quote later on that I think will be really helpful to kind of gain more context around that idea. Um, so, but for Malcolm, interestingly enough, Malcolm was one of the collaborators that actually did play in the NFL. And he talked about some of his motivations for doing so. So playing in the NFL meant that he could provide a better living and financial security for his family, um, and also to help his brothers um, go to college and understand how important academics could be too from that. So the motivation to go to the league really had other aspects to it that were beyond just kind of like I just want to play professional football. All right, so moving right along to research question number 3, which was, let me just go ahead and move it. Research question number 3, what cultural factors such as ethnic background, language, music, geographic location, um, how have those things influenced what it means to be successful? And the theme here was cultural influences included my home, like they would say my hometown, or like people back home, or things about their back home community, and then also family/ethnic influences that included family values, limitations that they saw within or outside of the family, communication styles, the way that they communicated with their parents or their parents communicated with them, and then also whether or not what their parents actually did. Did the parents go to college? Did they play football? Did they play any sports? These were different things that kind of showed up. So for JQ, he talked about um, going home with bad grades and how that wasn't acceptable and how he was held accountable for that, to come home and to have good grades. And then Malcolm also shares just how the camaraderie of his community back home really sat with really he really kept that with him as he continued to go through school, and what he thought about when it came to achieving success. So we can see here that there are cultural factors that really do play a role and kind of stay with Black male student athletes as they continue to go through college, and things that they think about as they continue um, to work hard on the football field or to go to class, and just all of the things that they would be doing in their time as student athletes. All right, so the research question number 4, we have how do campus cultures and subcultures or the environment of being on campus, like how did that affect the way they view success, or what were their experiences that played a role in how they view success? So theme here, we have professors and academic staff, while also experiencing stereotypes by different players on campus. They also talked about one professor in particular who had a huge impact um, on their experience being in college. So I thought that was really interesting that several other collaborators had one particular professor that they all had run-ins with that really influenced the way they approached what it meant to be successful. Coaches and athletic staff seemed to impart some kind of wisdom or skills that motivated the Black male student athletes to work harder or to approach whatever it was that they was working on. So whether it had been getting better on the field or just success in general, things that they were interested in accomplishing outside of sport. Their teammates helped to really influence the way they view relationships and work ethic. So like, how the importance of relationships as it pertains to accomplishing different things and how relationships can really influence that. So that was another thing that came up. And then lastly, classmates and student peers really helped them to see, I'm going to necessarily say help, really brought to awareness of how being Black male student athletes on campus, there was not many Black students to begin with at the school that they attended, which was a historically white institution. Um, but really that was something that continued to come up. So going to class and being the only Black person in the class, or walking across campus and not seeing a lot of people who look like me, or not seeing a lot of professors who look like me, that was something that came up. But then also interestingly, they were motivated to step their game up in the classroom because the goals that the classmates had in terms of making good grades or doing this, being involved in that on campus, made them want to be better. So ultimately improved the way they thought about learning and the way they thought about achieving good grades in school. So um, yeah, wrote a lot of like rich information as it pertains to this theme. And then, also I'm just thinking here when we think back to CRT being applied here, um, I think that idea of being at a historically white institution, right, for so long, that's kind of been, I won't say kind of been, that's been what kind of like a microcosm of what society looks like in certain spaces. So to be the only Black person in a space trying to reach towards a particular goal or be involved in a particular thing. So the centrality of racism and how that shows up, or just race, the centrality of race and racism and how it plays out and what it looks like in U.S. society. I think on historically white institutions, which are oftentimes the most well endowed or the most athletically visible on TV. I think that's definitely something to be mentioned here in terms of the campus environment that these guys attended school at. All right, so then we have research question number 5, which was how has racism played a way in the way they view success, or just their how has that impacted their views on success? And racism is served as a motivation to achieve and to not make excuses. So I'm not going to let this idea of being discriminated against or being treated a certain way stop me from achieving what I'm here to achieve. Also, the experiences of racism uh, that were also communicated, even just not even in some of their time throughout college, but then prior to college, like not much being or as much being expected academically or just in general of them versus their peers. So turning in the paper and it's like, oh, just submit what you can or just do what you can, and not really getting that kind of extra push to kind of do more, go above and beyond. So, and then lastly, this idea of having to work twice as hard consistently came up as a theme for research question number 5, just because of my identity as a Black student athlete or a Black person in general at this school, feeling like I have to do more or feeling like the professor isn't maybe treating me the same way as they're treating other students, my other classmates. So one of the let's see. So yeah, Dre talks about this right here. Whether it was teachers saying, "Hey, just give me what you can," or "Do what you can," or whether it was coaches saying, "Nah, I know you faster than that." So having these expectations kind of put on them based off of their identity as a Black male, when really maybe not being justified as to why they wouldn't push this student versus push another student or expecting certain things. See where we at on time. Okay, all right, pretty well here. All right, so then we can I'll go through a couple like discussion points for each research question, and then I'll leave you all with some quotes from the research that I thought were really important. Um, so then for research question number 1, again, significant achievements, again, really really revolved around mostly academic and athletic athlete sport related ideas. Um, which makes sense, right? Like that's kind of like the hallmark of being a student athlete. Everything that you're doing is either related to like going to class and maintaining what you need to continue to play, but then also participating in your particular sport. So it makes sense that during that time, um, those things will come up. I thought another important thing here was just the definition of success, including the ability to establish and achieve goals set out by themselves. I think for student athletes in general, these are typically students on campus that are visible. Usually they maybe walk around with their gear. It's kind of like more times easily identified on campus. And there's a lot of people that want to kind of be involved in the experience of a student athlete while they're playing. So with that comes a lot of different ideas about what you should do, what you shouldn't do, how you're doing it, how you're not doing. So I really thought that was really important idea that came up as a theme. Success being self-defined and not too much defined by you for you by other people. For research question number 2, just in kind of thinking about the things that came up. Definitely that idea of athletic motivation, the main goal being to go to the league or go pro. That was definitely consistent with research around how black male student athletes will approach, um, success in that regard. But then also, I really thought that the academic goals, graduating college and maintaining a GPA over 3.0. I know when I was in school, that was definitely something that I reached out for, was to maintain a 3.0 or higher. But it wasn't something that my peers I always heard my peers saying. So for this entire group to have that as an academic goal, I thought that was really interesting and really kind of different, kind of like a counter narrative compared to things oftentimes seen in the literature. All right, so for research question number 3, hometown communities. That was something that I really thought was when as each of them talked about the experience, and the impact of back home on what they were working on and how they thought about what it meant to be successful. I thought that was really interesting, in terms of how where they come from still sticks with them and still kind of informs what they want to accomplish. And culture, even in my profession as a soon to be psychologist, culture is something that I really take important in my work. I really do try to take a multicultural approach and kind of understanding, where people come from, how do they identify, and how does that really affect their thinking. So that was one idea that I really thought was important to explore, and they really did talk about how, family and just things from back home, places they would go, different things that they would do, how that made help them to make sense of what they wanted for their life and what that meant for people back home as well. Yeah, and I also think about here, another idea to think about, from a critical race theory perspective is the importance of community, um, and the importance of community to black and brown folks over time. So throughout times of being oppressed or even throughout slavery, we oftentimes will hear about, how sticking together and the spirit of togetherness was what would pull people through. So I think that really is significant here as it pertains to why a community back home would be important and how it would inform the way somebody would a black male student athlete would view success and how they want to achieve it. So I'm coming up on time here. So in research, just again, just kind of like some things related to research question number 4 here, campus cultures and how, the campus culture really informed and how it affected their experiences with success. I think the biggest thing to understand here is the professor influence and how, most pretty much all of the professors that were talked about in terms of who the collaborators engaged with were white identified professors and, stereotypes that they experienced. So coming into class in sweatpants, one of them actually talked about, there was, this idea that, walked into class and on the first day, professor says, hey, all you football guys, I need y'all to sit in the back because I don't need y'all coming in, interrupting my class and coming in late and different things of that nature. So that's one important thing to really just take away from research question number 4 is the impact of professors and faculty on black male student athletes in their experience. And then with research question number 5, is talking about racism and how that played a role. Again, this idea of being seen as less capable and, not pushed to achieve more, but then also being a motivating factor, reciprocally being a motivating factor to, for them to want to achieve more and to not have that come up as an excuse like, oh, racism stopped me from doing what I needed to do. All right, so here I'll leave you with just a few quotes that I thought were really kind of impactful. Here we have Aaron talking about how he was trying to be funneled into a particular major, and that was something that he was absolutely not going to go through with. So I thought that was really powerful. Apex talked about the influence of culture in his sport of the hammer throw. So interestingly enough, the U.S. hammer throw isn't doesn't produce oftentimes the most gold medalists or more successful hammer throwers come from other parts of the world. And he talked about how learning about those other cultures really influenced the way he thought about achieving and different things to consider along the journey of achieving. Here we have Dre talking about how he, at the time of graduation, when he was getting ready to graduate, he was also looking forward to potentially getting drafted. And I thought this was real deep as he talked about his priorities being conflicted. His mom helped him to realize, like, you just achieved something that is equally, important and very much more and probably impactful in your life. But at the time, that was something that he really struggled with to kind of see. So that was really, I was really thankful to be able to have him share that information with me, because that was a really significant moment for him. And here we have King talking about how, I believe it was the head coach who told him that he wasn't here to go to class or to take classes, to take specific classes. He's here to win bowl games. And he took that as, you know what, I'm gonna get my education no matter what. This is just going to further motivate me to achieve the things that I want to achieve. And then we have JQ here who talked about hiding behind basketball and using basketball kind of as like a shield to not really think about what he wanted to do with his life after basketball. JQ would eventually forego his senior year playing basketball as a walk-on to focus more on academics and to focus more on where he would be going after college. So I thought that was really, really impactful. And then we have Malcolm, who played in the NFL, and he talked about how when he was in school, he felt like he had a better chance of making it to the NFL versus becoming a professor. So I thought that was really deep, because I mean, maybe certain kind of professorships are pretty rare or pretty difficult to get into, but being a professor in general, certainly there are more professors. Um, certainly there are more professors than there are NFL players on active rosters. So I thought that was really, really interesting. So the theoretical implications here, I definitely think counter storytelling, the permanence of racism, whiteness as property, interest convergence, and the critique of liberalism. I think all of those apply to varying degrees. I think counter storytelling is one that comes up more frequently than maybe per se, um, like whiteness as property or critique of liberalism. But I do think all of these apply in varying degrees throughout this research. So then the limitations, and wrap up here in a moment, open up the floor for questions. But limitations of this study, I would definitely say the sample size. It definitely would be nice to be able to get more Black male student athletes, more experiences at one time, and kind of sitting with that at one time versus maybe a smaller group. Also, the participant pool. The collaborators in this study, I had 4 footballers, 1 basketball, and 1 track and field. So obviously, more heavily dominated by football players. But it will be interesting to kind of maybe get the perspective of maybe men's volleyball or baseball, swimming, all of the other sports that encompass collegiate athletics. Also, just the nature of qualitative studies with limited and generalizability. Obviously, these guys, and what they accomplished and things that they experienced would not be the same for all Black male student athletes. But I do think that their experiences are rich and have aspects that may or may not be similar to other Black male student athletes across the country. Also, another limitation would be in thinking about collaborators' recollection of their experiences. Again, most of the collaborators in this study were removed from their time as student athletes within a 5-year period. So maybe the way that they remember what things were like. Somebody got their mic off. I mean, let's see. All right. And then limited emphasis on socioeconomic status and quality education prior to college. That's a very important thing to consider. and it wasn't something that I explored as much, that I think could be more of a focus area as it pertains to different things that I explored with the collaborators. All right, so then when we think about future research, definitely don't want to not be mindful of Black female student athletes, Black male student athlete counterparts, their experiences at the intersection of race and sport, what their outcomes look like post graduation, and the types of things that they view as successful. Because obviously, we don't exist in a vacuum as one gender. So I definitely think future research should continue to explore um, Black female student athletes experiences also across different sports. I just kind of talked about that a little bit in the limitations. Black male student athletes at the youth, middle, and high school levels. Obviously, college athletes don't become college athletes just out of nowhere. They have to go through the process of, becoming what they are once they get to that level. So, really looking at the experiences of a younger demographic within this population, and then different institutional types. So historically Black colleges, more historically white institutions of different geographic areas, and then minority serving institutions. So institutions that serve a particular minority community in varying population levels. So then just to wrap things up, conclusions here, the overall themes and things that to take away from this study is that success has a legacy component to it, and it involves impacting others. It's not just what can I accomplish and what can I get from that on my own. Success is ever changing and again self-defined. Seeing successful people who look like me um, was definitely something in the focus group, and then as I scanned throughout the research as a whole, how important it was to see people in professorships or in certain careers that look like them. Having to work twice as hard as a Black male student athlete, and the impact of a mentor figure on success orientation. There was one professor in particular that really challenged the collaborators to think outside of the box and to think of themselves outside of the athlete identity, and just was always asking questions, was always curious about the way they were thinking. So these are takeaways, conclusions. Again, this information, uh, much of the information supported previous research, but then I do think there were also some nuances that weren't represented, specifically from this group, in terms of being high achieving, and things that they set out to achieve and viewed as success. I think this research provides insight into how Black male student athletes who participated in sport at a Division I institution think about success, and provides experiences about a population of individuals that isn't abundantly explored. Research is continuing to expand, but it can be difficult to gain access to college athletes when it comes to um, just their schedules, different things that they're involved in, but then also kind of other stakeholders who play a role in gaining access to them and their experiences. And I would like to thank uh, sadly, Dr. Hagee, my program advisor, and also Dr. Lee, who's my previous advisor before she transitioned to another institution. You guys have been really pivotal and along with me along the way the whole time, directly available and answering to so many questions and helping me figure things out. Dr. Cooper, also on my committee. Um, Thank you, man, for all of your motivation and being the hype man and really just every time, like, let's go, let's do it. You got this, baby. Like, all of that, man. Like, that was super helpful. My peer mentor, Dr. Sadell Williams, he was my peer mentor throughout my doctoral program. Just all of the questions that you would feel from a student's perspective, how to get this done, how to get that done, how to go about doing this, doing that. All of my colleagues and leadership training supervisors at my internship and practicums across the country, or really across New England, and then now down here in Florida. Much special thanks to my collaborators, in protecting anonymity, JQ, Apex, King, Malcolm, Dre, Aaron. I wouldn't been able to do this without y'all. And then, of course, family, friends, colleagues, professors, peers, coworkers, so many people I think it's funny. I tried to list. I started to try to list everybody, and then I got to like 100 people, and that wasn't even like 10% of the people that I was trying to think. So, just much thanks to everybody who helped me along this journey and helped me get this thing done. And I just like to say thank you.
Okay, we can turn to time for questions. We probably, I don't, Dr. Cooper, are you able to stay until 5? Are you, okay, great. So why don't we take until about 4:30 for questions? I know it looks like we may already have a comment in the chat box from Dr. Parham. If you wanted to respond to that, Marcus.
Yeah, I'm reading through Dr. Parham's question here. Yes, so definitely, Dr. Parham, more internal aspects of success. I can speak to one of the collaborators. Definitely talked about how, for him, competition. Matter of fact, actually, two or three of the collaborators talked about how competition, being internally motivated to be better, to outwork their peers, to outwork everyone else, and really that being instilled at an early age. I think that was definitely an internal mark of success, that whenever they were able to achieve, I don't know, getting like a certain statistic or earning a certain grade, and that was better than one of their peers, like that really did something for them. Also, one of the collaborators who also spoke about that idea, he talked about how matriculating and navigating through an athletic program, the the um, the the mood of the athletic program and the mood of the team was really rooted in strength and always being strong and always achieving and working towards something, when maybe asking how I'm doing, how is my mental health, like how am I feeling, maybe not as much room left for that kind of talk and that kind of thing. I'm just reading through the tail end of the question here. Yeah, and then interestingly enough, so one of the collaborators, he was a second semester senior, so no longer competing as a track and field athlete, but very much still in school during COVID. Whereas the rest of the guys, they had already graduated, but they also talked about how, how relationally they were affected, and what that meant for how they would continue to navigate what it was they were doing at the time. So some of the guys had kids. They really talked about relationally how important that was to them, and how rich that the experience of being a dad was. I definitely think that was an internal piece that didn't come up as much to be like an overall theme. Um, but yeah, I think several of those ideas definitely speak to internal markers, and I don't disagree that internal markers can be equally as motivating and meaningful as these external things. So like making it to the NFL, or achieving a certain kind of career, and those different kinds of things.
Thank you. Appreciate your response.
Definitely.
Great job, by the way. Great job.
Thank you, Dr. P. Yeah, if anybody else could definitely, the screen is pretty big here, so a lot of folks here. This is my first time actually getting to see everybody.
Marcus, I have a question. It's about the context of your study. The group that most, I think, did all of these men belong to the group up? Was it Uplift? And I wondered about that context of support and mentoring that existed for them. Because in many ways, this is a story about success, but it's also about successful athletes. This group was very successful. And to think about that context, I don't know, I wondered how you take account of it in terms of your findings.
Yeah, so the name of the student group, we referred to it as Holistic Uplift. It was a student organization that was organized by several football players at the institution. And it was really geared towards creating a space for student athletes to be able to come and be, have conversations that really stimulated their development holistically and not just be so tied up in doing sports stuff all the time. So my experience and participating, and I was committed to going every other Monday or every Monday really, and I would have conversations with student athletes from other sports, just about like how it felt to be able to talk about, I don't know, like religion and spirituality and how that played a role. Like how maybe I didn't get a chance. Like I'm here, I grew up going to church all the time, but it's really not a church here, and I'm struggling to find a community that I can kind of connect with. But then I think more largely, I definitely think this information can be used to create those kinds of groups at campuses across the country, because the professor who oversaw that student organization, not only was he a huge impact in terms of facilitating those conversations and facilitating those meetings and being a resource for like, how do I do this? Like, how do I apply for graduate school, or like, what should I do to maybe go in this direction of what I want to accomplish? So like having somebody like that to make themselves available amongst all of the stuff that a professor is engaged in, I think was really pivotal. And a lot of the students who went to that group really were, they really experienced some cool benefits from being in that space. Um, so they would, the professor, he would also have like other professionals come. So I remember one time there was like a prominent basketball coach that came to speak to the student athletes. And then there was a guy one time who was he was a LMAC, a licensed mental health counselor, came in to speak about mental health and the importance of that. So yeah, I think that's invaluable. That's really invaluable, because a lot of times when we see us, a lot of students wouldn't even be able to attend. The meetings will usually be like around 7 o'clock on Mondays, which is kind of a weird time because it's like you're out of practice and you probably wanting to go study or try to go get something to eat and try to wind down because you know you got a long day the next day. But for the ones who were able to come, I really do think they benefited from it. And I really think that was very impactful and really a centerpiece around their story of success.
Other comments or questions?
Just add a comment. Marcus, outstanding job. I know you've been working really hard at this for a long time, and several revisions, but a couple of things that I want to highlight that I think are very pivotal about your study, and then I'll ask a broader question. One, I really appreciate how you honor the humanity and the holistic identity of the participants. So often Black males who participate in sports are viewed only as athletic commodities, what they do on the field or on the court. And I loved how in your findings, you got to see the full human in them, their connection to their community, the connection to family, why going to school was so important, why earning a certain grade was important. It wasn't just about earning a grade, but for some of these participants, and I know because I read this study more thoroughly, they were the first in their family to go to college. So graduating had a particularly significant meaning for them. The other thing that, as Sally mentioned, that I thought was really compelling was the anti-deficit framework that was salient throughout the study, that you weren't asking them, well, how does it feel to be a stereotype? What are the challenges? Why are you failing? Why aren't you doing well? You really were asking them, what were factors that facilitated your success? What were the contributors that helped you navigate a space that does not always value you holistically? So I thought that was a very profound aspect of your study. My question for you, I already know in the future some of the work that you're going to be doing from a practitioner standpoint to work with Black male athletes across various levels, as well as Black females. Based on your findings, what recommendations do you have for institutional stakeholders, such as the coaches? One of the things that came to mind as you were mentioning, one of the coaches said, you're not here to, do well in school, you're here for bowl games. I wonder if you were able to present to a group of coaches, an athletic director, faculty members, particularly white faculty members who may be perpetuating these stereotypes, what recommendations would you have to them if they were concerned with improving the educational experiences and development of Black male student athletes?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Cooper, for prefacing that question. I definitely think a lot of what you mentioned is like really, really profound, right? Like with the deficit model. I think particularly coaches, right? Like coaches come up first. I coach football, played football, been around a lot of coaches, and I understand that that level, that can be a lot of pressure by coaches to win games. If we don't win, I don't keep my job. What's next for me? But then also, I think coaches spend so much time with these athletes that there has to be an ounce of time or a period of time over the amount of time they spend to be able to have conversations and just create a space, right? Like a lot of times, and I guess another part of this too is, right, like support for coaches as well in terms of what they experience. I think as a practitioner, a lot of times for people interested in working with athletes doing sports psychology, there's a lot of focus on the athlete, like how can we help them better perform? But as a psychologist on a college campus, I'm accessible to coaches as well. Recommendations can be made for, maybe not for like direct therapy services, but in terms of resources to help cope with or better navigate what they experience as coaches. That's a twofold kind of thing, right? So I believe at the postdoc that I have, their motto is the healthy athlete is the best performing athlete, and that's probably true for coaches as well, right? The more healthy the coach, the better, the more sharp the coach is. So I think recommendation for coaches would be definitely finding time to create some kind of space to facilitate these very conversations that I had with these collaborators. And then maybe more broadly, I would say finding ways to, like, institutionally to kind of loop athletes into the community, into the campus community in some kind of way, right? Like creating an experience that they may or may not have had otherwise. Because sometimes, like I know for me, I made a lot of friends outside of football, but that was because I was curious enough to do so. But just from being a part of the registered student organization at the school, these guys went to, we know that some of them didn't want to come because it was like, I got to go do football stuff, or I ain't got time for that, quite frankly, right? But that one maybe night you went to something, or you went to a program put on by one of the other student organizations, or you went to a talk or something that was on campus, they brought somebody in, that could be a defining moment in how you think about what you want to do. Again, for me, it was just simply like asking my academic advisor more questions about what I could do with a psychology degree. And then I ran across a sports psychology course that was taught over the summertime. And I thought that was so fascinating. I was like, yep, that's it. That's what I want to do, right? But had, not like being motivated to ask those questions and to be engaged with my advisor and maybe go in different spaces across campus. I do think these are all things that more broadly institutionally. And then the last thing I'll say also is when it comes to college admissions, right? Like how do college admissions officers approach bringing in like Black students? Like what are those recruiting efforts like? Like I know oftentimes that those entities, they work together to get scholarship athletes on campus, but in terms of where they're recruiting and where they're putting out ads, where they're putting out marketing, where they're gearing the types of athletes that they're bringing into the school, I think also that could be another area to consider for admissions officers, having a little bit more, I don't know, I guess being a little bit more informed. Because again, like I have experience with how some athletic departments function, and that can be a very encapsulated, like insulated space, right? So I think, forging better relationships can better benefit the student athletes in terms of what things are created for them and how things are organized for them in terms of things that will facilitate their holistic development and how they achieve the things they want to achieve.
And I think that's phenomenal. And I'm just going to encourage you, based on reading your chapter 5, I think you're onto something very significant. And what I mean by that is I could envision you, soon to be Dr. Dumas, putting together a report card or an assessment tool, if you will, for institutions to examine whether they are actually facilitating the holistic development of their student athletes. Because as you've mentioned, what we see all the time in the NCAA and all these institutions is graduation rates. But I think you named off numerous things related to holistic development, integration into the campus community, mentorship, right? Community involvement, other metrics of success, and everything that you just spelled out. I think you could put that together in a tool that could be a benchmark for schools to use to say, if we are truly committed to holistic development, this is what our coaches should be doing. This is what our faculty should be doing. This is the type of engagement and time that should be allocated for student athletes to be emerged outside of athletics. So I just wanted you, I'm glad that you were able to articulate that for the audience. But beyond this dissertation, I would love to see you take this work to have a broader impact. So I'll pause there. Great job.
Sure. Thanks, Dr. Cooper.
There is one question in the chat box, Marcus, from David. I'm not sure if you
All
see
right,
it.
let's see what Kyle got right here. Firstly, okay, so some self-reflection. Yes, I would consider myself successful. And I, for me, I think the reason why I would consider myself successful is because, I mean, just like finishing this study elicited a lot of self-reflection. And I think the thing that continued to come up for me was just really, I'm successful because I stayed doing what I said I wanted to do, right? Like there was something to accomplish. There was a road, a journey to be embarked upon. And I didn't just say, like at the master's level, like, man, I'm gonna just go do this because this is, I don't have to go through this, or, so I really think the idea of speaking things into existence and, just really just staying the course. I think that's a huge part of success. And I oftentimes talk to my colleagues about one of my frat brothers. He's in entrepreneurship, and I really learned a lot about business and how most businesses fail within this amount of time. Most businesses fail within that amount of time. But oftentimes businesses come back in the form of another name. A lot of people don't know that, right? Like you go bankrupt, but then you pop back up, and it's a lot of the people are the same, but the name is different, right? I think I do consider that success over time, to be able to continue doing something no matter like what gets in your way. Like, yeah, you might lose a lot of money, you might lose it all, but who's not to say you can't gain it back tenfold, right? So I think that really speaks to, for me, why I would consider myself successful. Yeah, I do want to say just I'm seeing some of the other comments, like, thanks for everybody for the love. I'm gonna have to save this chat, go back and read everything.
I'll go ahead and make a comment. Soon to be Dr. Dumas. It's nice seeing you again. First of all, I gotta say, I love the fade. It's clean.
Thank you.
Thank you. My question is gonna kind of go along with what I think David asked. Is like, now that you understand that you're a success story, that you are like fully successful, that you are just like the people you interviewed. You've made it basically, or you've made a part of your journey. But one part I liked about your study is just showing that these athletes, they're well aware of their environment, how they're being judged and stereotyped. I didn't play D1 or anything like that, but even in high school, I got those looks from teachers, from coaches, like how they addressed me and my teammates, even some of my friends, with basically how we looked. Oh, you look fast, you run this and stuff like that. So I appreciate you bringing that up, and them kind of showing like we're aware how we're being looked, we're aware how we're being judged. But at the end of the day, I think like just kind of putting your head down and just kind of working through it. And you just interviewed them, and at the end of the day, they're still successful. And I think that's huge. Showing that they overcame all those stereotypes and became a better version of themselves. So I appreciate you showing that aspect of Black male athlete.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, definitely appreciate you mentioned that idea. It is encouraging, like having had the opportunity to explore this idea. Much thanks to like Sally and the faculty at Springfield, like being open to this kind of research inquiry, right? Because again, like these types of things are can bring up feelings, and when looking at certain factors that play a role in why a person may or may not achieve something. And so yeah, I think that relates to Dr. Cooper's point about not approaching from a deficit approach, really looking at a strength-based model, and asking questions and stimulating conversations around what have you done, what do you want to do, where do you want to go, versus, well, why haven't you done this, or why does this look that way? So I appreciate it.
Marcus, again, I want to echo Dr. Cooper's remarks that you did a fabulous job today, and with lots of pressure with all these people here. I really kudos to you. Reflecting on what you had mentioned earlier about your own success, I was thinking about the idea of self-identity and the strength of legacy and community. And I know I see some of your family here. I know that's been really important for you as well. And I wondered about the intersection of those two ideas. The fact that when we have this strong connection with our community, we're able to assert ourselves and be ourselves and say, I'm going to do it this way because this is who I am. Have you thought about those two, how those sub-themes connect?
Yeah, for sure. Like the idea that came to mind as you were speaking was like, I thought about like how in countries across the world, like how important soccer is to other countries, and like the meaning behind competing for your country, right? Like this is a place you grow up, this is a place you experience, this is where like there's so many things tied to. It's much more than a game, right? It's like an outward communication of your people, your nation, your flag, right? And what that means to the rest of the world. So I thought about that. I think at the intersection of culture and success achievement or just motivation, again, I think personally, that's a lot of the reason why I chose a multicultural approach to counseling, and just really considering contextual factors that play a role in how people see the world. The environments that we come up in, we can't choose our parents. We can't choose where we're born into the world. We can't choose what time across time we come into the universe at, right? All these like kind of bigger order things, but contextual things that really play a factor. So I think in this kind of like casting a wide net, like, seeing what you get that come out of it, and then you can kind of start picking things out. I really do continue to think about how the cultural experience of a Black person or a BIPOC person. And again, like several of my collaborators came from different areas of the world. Like one of them was a native of the Caribbean. One was from the Northeast. Another one was from the Midwest. Like these different places of the United States carry different kinds of experiences, cultural experiences to that matter. And again, for me, like for sure, like as I look at my sister and my daddy here, they got the camera. Probably some other family on here that don't have the camera on, but just so many. I think back to my developmental class I took last summer before I went on internship, and how I had to retake that class which I was really upset about. But now that I reflect on it, it's really helpful to see the lifespan and how much goes into a person's experience from birth. I mean, even my grandfather's 90 years old and still exposed to, it's like a continuous like cycle of new information and knowledge being put into your cultural experience. So yeah, I think it's invaluable. Like I really think it's invaluable, and to not ask that question leaves so much on the table for how you might understand what really motivated a person to go after the things that they're going after.
Any other comments or questions?
I have just a broad question. Number one, congratulations, Marcus. Obviously, I've been watching you do it for since the second grade, so it's impressive. We're 30. Well, you'll be tomorrow, but Dr. Cooper brought up something that's been on my mind as we've discussed you writing your dissertation for a while. Is like after this work is done, he brought up this important thing of building an assessment tool in order to help others understand, because they're missing that piece of information. If there was an assessment tool that was dished out previously before, how do you think that would have helped you as a student athlete? How do you feel like, hey, this would have helped my holistic growth and change the course of where I am today if, years ago, this type of thing was formed and it was implemented and I was a part of that? How do you feel like that would have helped your development?
Man, first of all, that's an excellent question. I would leave it up to somebody who I've known that long to ask a question like that. I think if that was available to me, I would have been able to, I probably would have been able to think about stuff that I thought about earlier. I would have been able to think about it earlier, and that could have alleviated some big stress, right? Like I could have went through that time a little bit more like mentally sound, emotionally sound. But then also, as like that could have been another tool for like learning certain things about myself, right? Like learning, like endorsing certain interests or endorsing certain directions. Again, that if I could have like kind of laid things down a little earlier, my path is just maybe my path isn't like significantly better, but it's a little bit more fine tuned. Like it hits a little bit smoother. Because I mean, I like to think of myself as someone who's pretty academically motivated. And it's real cool to have Julie on here, my sister. She got a doctorate. And that was a huge motivation for me. Like I got a sister with a doctorate. Like I got to at least be, like solid academically, and knowing that I could be because of that. So, yeah, I think it definitely could be a learning tool, and then administered by. I'm just thinking of the people who could have administered it as well. Like, if the counseling center on campus had this type of thing for whoever specialized in work with athletes has this little assessment they do when athletes come in, or if it was my very own head coach or my position coach, or if it was my academic advisor. So I think it's a lot of touch points for that kind of thing to exist. And it can really be used to stimulate questions and ideas that can better help. Yeah, for sure. I really appreciate that question, Chris. That's very thorough, because some of the collaborators talked about that. They talked about how me having a conversation with me was so helpful even after they time having competed, right? Like they was like, man, like, I appreciate you so much, bro, for just having a conversation with us, because I never, like, these are things that I never even thought about. Like nobody was talking to me about this. So having it in assessment form could be largely impactful.
Any other comments or questions?
I have one question. Great job, Marcus. Definitely remember kind of brainstorming about this like in the beginning stages of the program. So great job to get to this part and to be defending it. With my current research and just what I've seen in my community being around so many Black athletes and Black male athletes, have you thought, so sorry for the music, but have you thought so much about the holistic health, like the weight management for former student athletes, just what they could be up against? So they're so used to being surrounded by trainers, the environment, solo, separate, isolated gym time. And then now they have to go out into the world and have to kind of reconstruct that. Have you thought so much about that? Has that come up, or do you plan to add that to your assessment?
It came up very like sparingly. I did have one or two of the guys talk about how like post sport things being like, eating more, enjoying good food, not exercising as much. But I do appreciate you asking that question, because that's something I definitely consider in my clinical work from a holistic health perspective, like how you sleeping, how you eating, and how do you exercise. And when we think about self-care, right, like self-care is directly associated with success achievement. And that's a question that will continue to be asked over time, like what's the perfect balance, right? The 50-hour work week, 60-hour work week, but how do you take care of yourself at the same time? So it didn't come up as much in terms of how it would fit in the assessment. I think it could maybe start to get them to thinking about how things will be different. And a lot of times it's in retrospect, right? Like I had weights at 7 a.m., I had weights at 4, I had practice at this time. Whenever that structure goes away, now it's up to you to create that for yourself. And also you may or may not have access to food the same way you did. So I think that probably could be like like if there was a miscellaneous like category like weighted into the rest of the questions, that could probably spit out some information that could be helpful, because that is very important. I think that's very important. So much of being an athlete is tied to your body as a tool. And once you're no longer using your body as a tool, how does your body respond to that, and how does that make you feel? Maybe you're using other aspects of your body now to be a tool in whatever work that it is that you do. So yeah, that's a cool question, Kirby. I appreciate it. I think Payway had her hand up.
Yeah, Marcus, congratulations. Wow, it's awesome to see you telling the story of that. I think it's a defense, but also it's a journey, a doctor journey, and this research project. It takes a lot of efforts and just thoughtfulness, and it's just wonderful to see it, and wonderful job, and really enjoyed it. So I have maybe a comment / question, and I resonate with very much what Dr. Cooper was said earlier about how important, and you yourself talking about counter narrative is a form of resistance, right? So even bringing the athletes at their full humanity, their ordinariness, their fullness of their voices and their experiences, that itself is a resistance. And we need so much more of that. And I really appreciate that aspect of it. And I, meanwhile, if I kind of shift back from that, individual, and then kind of I'm thinking about the sports industry complex, right? It's almost like what athletes facing is such a Black athletes, like or athletes of color in general, and how that doubleness. On one side, you have racialized experiences, stereotypes specific to athletes, right? There's kind of really narrowed paths of success already there. And you have this larger on the other side, this sports industry complex where so much money, so much profit making, and there's also related to a commodification and sort of like just reducing people to players, right? So it's like constraining on both sides. So I wonder, how does this like perhaps these two aspects of it and might have showed up from the participants' narrative, like this racialized discourse and oppressive forces, and then this larger, if we will, like, you know, capitalist, this industry, like money flow, there's money making, who is benefiting from that. So there's that two forces both there. So I wonder if you have some thoughts on that.
Yes, for sure. Two things that come to mind is the recent legislation or talks of student athletes being paid. But then also like maybe a more organic and grassroots kind of movement of like the top athletes choosing to go to HBCUs and choosing to go to schools that aren't, you know, that's not kind of like in that machine. You know, I mean, I think, you know, I always love to reflect on, you know, history tells it that, you know, in the 1950s, 1940s, even like early 60s, a lot of the best Black players were going to professional ranks through HBCUs, right? Like that's where they was going. But then speaking of what you just mentioned, once historically white colleges and universities saw that there was money to be made and there was a lot of like pageantry around having these athletes come study here, but also play. That's kind of like when the NCAA formed itself and kind of like took that role. So, you know, I would love to see that. You know, I think that could be amazing. But again, like the endowments that HBCUs have, you know, it's not going to be as high as a Harvard or a Stanford or whomever. So finding ways for funding to be had in those places that to where they could support those athletes the same way that the Power 5 schools can. But then also continuing to sit with that, I mean, even in the professional ranks, right? Like, it's always interesting to me when collective bargaining time comes up for the NFL or for the NBA. And the last vote, I think it was, I can't remember if it was NBA or NFL. It was the closest vote that they ever got towards saying, no, we don't want it, rewrite it. Like, let's look at it again, right? I think that's progress. Hopefully it's progress. Like, hopefully the next one has stuff in it that is so much more beneficial for the owners, which it usually is, and they shoot it down and something changes from it. Maybe it's not like a 180, you know, a total change, but I think what you said, like about that resistance period, like, you know, like having that experience and that counter narrative, like, yeah, the way it usually goes is we write it up. Y'all are not as mindful enough to read it or to really like downplay it. Why? Because people want to see football this fall. People want to see basketball this spring. So we don't want to stop that. But the moment that type of thing can occur, you know, that's a counter narrative. Like, that's never been done before. So now we really got to look at this and see, like, okay, how can we meet the demands of the players to where they're getting a fair share of this too? Because I think it's really interesting professionally because there's so much money. Like Ricky Williams, actually, he was a running back for the Saints, went to UT Austin. You know, he was telling Shannon Sharpe on his podcast how, man, they put millions in front of my face, right? It was millions. Like, even though my deal was crap and my agent screwed me and so many people benefited off of me, it was millions of dollars. Like, I ain't seen no money like that. You know, like, my family ain't never seen no money like that. So it's just, it's so tough. But I do, there are a lot of more conversations through podcasts, you know, different like commentators on these different shows, like bringing these ideas up that's getting players to think more. We're starting to see like some NFL players retire early, right? Like, they'll play just enough until the time where they can get retirement from the NFL and then say, you know, I'm done, don't want to play no more. Now, obviously that's a small percentage, right? Like, it's not a lot of guys that can like have the luxury to make that decision. But I think it's cool to see people making decisions that are counter narratives, right? Like retiring in year 5 when I can play 10 years. Choosing to go to HBCU versus, you know, big school. You know, even I don't want to say like making certain demands, but you know, yeah, I really appreciate that period. I think from a systems perspective, you know, systems can be really hard to grapple with because how rooted they are and, you know, the power structure. But again, these grassroots initiatives and people continue to have more and more conversations, like really giving this a thought, like, man, I'm nice. I can go here and still ball and get a chance. Like, you know, like, let me go and do that. So, yeah.
I guess Dr. DeAndre had a question. We probably need to end it after that. Dr. DeAndre? You're muted, I think.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Dumas, for the presentation here. You know, one of the largest dimensions going on is the counter narrative that you had mentioned, counter narratives. The big one that's happening that I see is following up on the reaction to George Floyd and the ongoing problem of violence against persons of color, especially Black men in our society. So as a white male who's committed to looking at ways of dismantling white racism and white supremacy, what I'm taking away from this presentation is the importance for us. And I think Dr. Cooper hit on it institutionally. How do we institutionally work to kind of incorporate your findings in this research to help us kind of think about how does white racism and white supremacy affect the conceptualizing of success among people of color and as student athletes in particular going on here. So I think you've kind of unveiled a counter narrative here that's important for policymakers and white faculty members in particular to kind of consider how do we unwittingly contribute to negative conceptualizing of success. I wonder if you have any closing comments here, and congratulations, and I appreciate that, but I really appreciate you kind of stimulating thinking about institutional change from an anti-racist perspective.
Yeah, Dr. DeAndre, I super appreciate that question, man. You know, in our conversations, you know, something that I've admired about you is, you know, kind of like your interface attitude with like putting concepts and ideas out there, coming like as a white man, and you know, like you recognizing the impact of that. I think that institutionally, you know, I just think about like, you know, in faculty meetings, right? Like in faculty meetings prior to school starting, like as professors, you all know who's on your class roster, and you maybe potentially know if you have athletes on it or not. And so how you greet these athletes the first day of class, right? Like what the conversation like that you having with them? Are you not acknowledging them at all? I mean, you know, you're probably gonna have conversations with them because they probably might have to miss a class or two. They're gonna have things come up. So that initial conversation, how you start that off can really set the tone for how they feel about you and their perception of how you feel about them. So, you know, I would definitely be interested in, you know, talking more with you about, you know, what's that experience like for you as a white man when you do have Black players, you know, come into your classroom, and, you know, how you navigate supporting them, and how even checking in with them to see how they feel about you, you know. But then there's another part about it too in my own experience that was really cool for me. My freshman year, I mean, I don't know if she's on the call or not, but Dr. Jennifer Bruniger, I'm not sure if she's here or not, but she was a white woman, and was my intro to psychology teacher. I sat in the corner, in the front right corner of that class, and she engaged me, right? Like she engaged me. She saw that I was motivated. She called on me in class. You know, it was things like that that she did that really helped me to buy it more. I mean, I was interested in psychology already coming into school, but you know, that really was like pivotal for me. And I ended up making an A in that class. And that was really what let me know, like, because intro to psychology is actually not one of the easiest classes for incoming freshmen. That could be a pretty hard course. But I made an A in it, and it went down to the final. Like, because I did well in the final, I made an A. And she would go, you know, she would ultimately end up writing a letter of recommendation for my doctoral program. But I think those things can be so pivotal, you know. But again, the last thing I can say on that is, as a personal part of that, right? Like as a white person, like how do you really feel about doing that kind of work? And when you go home at night, like how do you really feel about the things that's happening? You know, if you really don't care too much about it, then that's maybe gonna be a different experience for you. If you really care about it, it's probably gonna be maybe a little more easier experience for you to learn and to figure out, you know, how that is when a Black student says, oh man, that person don't care about me, or, you know, they making it hard for me to make this grade, or they doing this to do that. So that's a part of it that we cannot forget. And again, Dr. DeAndre, I appreciate, you know, the story you shared with me about your experience, and, you know, like you said, trying to dismantle white racism, and depression. So yeah.
Yeah, well, I want to thank everyone for coming today and for all your great questions. Congratulations, Marcus. You did a wonderful job. If Dr. Cooper and Marcus and I could have the rest of the time today to try to figure out what he needs to do to finish this up, graduate. So thank you all for being here. Marcus, do you want to say any closing?
Yeah, of course. Just again, like, like, just thank you, everybody. Like, I wish I could say everybody's name. Like, so many people on here. Like, it's really cool to see so many people from different parts of the journey, like, on the Zoom call at the same time. And, I know a lot of times I've gotten heat from certain people, some of you, on, not being in communication or, what you doing like that busy. Some people I haven't talked to like in weeks or months, but, you here and, I appreciate you being here, and just know that, no matter how small or big you may feel, like it's important to me that you were here, and I appreciate everybody along the journey. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.